Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast. We are live in person. We got the Chris Collingsworth slide going on from Tyler. Tyler and I have known each other for about 4 years now, and this is the first time that we have met in person. So we're really excited. Got a fun episode planned for you guys today. Tyler, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. They thought I was here for their dry cleaning or to draw some Chinese food or something, so they almost didn't let me in. But thankfully, Steven recognized me and I got in here. But it's going great. Happy to be here in Newport Beach, and we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, it's gonna be really fun, really interesting. Obviously, we had to do us next to each other instead of separate computers, but it's all good. Alex, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good, and so yeah, two out of 3 ain't bad. Hopefully, one day distant in the future, we can make that 3 out of 3. But that's for another time.
Exactly. So, like I said, we have a fun episode planned for you guys today. We are going to jump right now to an interview with Jeff Duncan, who wrote the Drew Brees and Sean Payton book that I have talked about ad nauseum at this point. So that the audio version of that is going to happen right now. And then after that, we're going to get to some questions that Alex posted on Twitter. So here is Jeff Duncan. All right, so let's get to these questions. We're really excited about all these questions. There was quite a few that I'm particularly interested in. The first one is coming from Bold Brett, a friend of the podcast, who obviously has helped us out with a lot of these YouTube graphics and things like that. He wants to know, can Brandon Staley's scheme cover up the lack of depth when the starters inevitably get hurt? So, Alex, we'll start with you on that one. What are your thoughts here?
I think that it can potentially cover up is maybe the wrong term. I think it can lessen the effects of it. But yeah, look, at the end of the day, if Michael Davis or Derwin James or a lot of those high-end starters go down, you are asking for a lot anyway, and then it's probably not going to be good. But I do think if, say, can they survive a week or two without Uchenna and Nwosu? Maybe, right? Can they survive a week or two without, maybe Chris Harris if he were to get injured? I think so. But again, any injury to really the high-tier starters at every level of the defense, and I don't really think you can cover it up. But again, I think Staley's scheme can kind of lessen the impact of it.
Yeah, I think the Chargers will do the best they can. If they lose guys, that's fine. That's not fine. But I think Staley can do the best with what he has. But at the end of the day, the lack of talent is not there. The lack of talent is there. So they're not going to be able to work together. Gosh, it's so weird sitting next to a person who just looked at me. It's really creepy. But can they cover it up? No. Can they do without some players? No. But they'll do the best they can, and if anyone can do it, it's Staley.
Yeah, I think there's some extent of this, right? Like losing Joey Bosa, Derwin James is obviously going to be very difficult. But if you have a couple of games without Asante Samuel Jr. or Chris Harris, I think that's much more manageable. We've talked about the depth at linebacker. I think that's the spot that you can kind of mix things up a little bit. I don't know how much you lose if Drew Tranquil is out and you're starting Kaiser White, for example. So I think that in particular is a position where they can cover some things up. Next question from Trevor Black. Who is starting outside corner week 1? I think he means specifically opposite of Michael Davis.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think most people kind of assume that's going to be the case. So, Tyler, who do you think is going to start opposite of Michael Davis starting week 1?
You gave me the tough one. Asante Samuel Jr., next question.
I would think it's going to be Asante Samuel Jr. Unless we see maybe some signs in the preseason of him not looking great, but I don't think that's going to happen to me. You drafted this guy with a mid-second round pick. I think they envision him starting from the beginning, but of course what we've heard about Brandon Faison is him getting those first team reps at outside corner. So it wouldn't shock me if he started week 1, but I would be pretty surprised if Asante Samuel Jr. were to have a relatively good preseason and it would still be the case that Faison was starting. So if I had to put up odds on it, I'd probably say like 80% Samuel, probably 20% Faison. But I think inevitably what's going to happen is that Samuel's going to win that job, whether it's by week 1 or not. I don't know, but I think it's, pretty clearly that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, that should absolutely be the expectation. We've seen some coaches kind of prefer to bring their rookies along slow. Even Gus Bradley and Anthony Lynn didn't start Derwin right away, and obviously those expectations for him were much higher than they're going to be for Asante Samuel Jr. So Brandon Faison starting week 1 would not shock me, but I do expect Asante Samuel Jr. to be that guy.
It would shock me, I think, because, like you said, even the previous coaching staff, they take some time to get their rookies going. But there's always somebody in front of those, particularly second-round picks. So Hunter Henry had Gates in front of him, and Adderley had Jenkins in front of him, and then most had Ingram in front of him. Like, Faison being in front of Samuel Jr. is just a little speed bump. That's not exactly the opposite of him getting on the field. So I think he has to start week 1.
And I would say the other difference is, in comparison to last year, where you did have kind of that 2020 no preseason, right? That might be more of a situation. Obviously, we saw Justin Herbert was sitting behind Tyrod Taylor. If Asante Samuel Jr. didn't have multiple preseason games, we're talking specifically 3 to show off his stuff, I think there would be a better chance that he Faison would start from the beginning. But I think there's less of a chance of it happening this year. Yeah,
those are good points for sure. Next question, we've got a couple of variations of this one, so we'll kind of tackle this in one. This comes from @TT_850. He says, I'm a huge Brandon Staley fan, but if we don't see immediate success or at least a positive difference, how much patience should Chargers fans have? We're in a Perform Now league, see Tua versus Herbert, for example. So the 3 of us have kind of talked about being patient in year 1, and things could take, a long time to get them really into rhythm with these new schemes. So, I mean, if the Chargers go like 7-10, then maybe there's some kind of concern, but I'm mostly looking for growth throughout the season, right? Like if they start 2-4 and then they kind of figure it out, like I think that's fine, So I think there should be patience throughout the season with the end goal in mind of, improving from week to week and hopefully being, a completely different team in week 17 than they are in week 1.
Right. I think if you're just talking about purely like, because the question is kind of phrased in like, oh, if we don't see results this year and say the Chargers go 7-10 again, or if it's kind of a, let's say they underperform and they're 5-11, 5-12, 6-11. If they're that kind of team, then is there a potential that he's fired? Maybe at that point, but I think they just really gave Tom Telesco a new coaching hire, and because of that, I think they'd be kind of willing to wait things out. I also think it's a matter of how does the team look as opposed to any other record, right? Because we saw, Anthony Lynn won his last 4 games last year. And if you just, looked at the records and were like, hey, this team was 5-11 in 2019, and then they went 7-9 with a rookie quarterback. Like if you just told those facts to somebody straight up, then it would be like, well, actually, maybe we should keep them. But then, you get into all of the reasons that the season played out that way, how Justin Herbert looked, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's not really a record that I want to put on it, but, it's sort of hard to say what Staley's job security would be in kind of any kind of simulations you create, right? Because you can probably create some kind of 7-10 season where, Brandon Staley's able to keep his job, and you can create some kind of 8-9 season where he were to lose his job, right? Depending on what would happen. So ultimately, I think at the end of the day that his job is pretty safe given the fact that they allowed Telesco to hire another coach. So unless they're really bad, I don't see any world in which he gets fired in most simulations, if we want to say.
Yeah, I think the pressure, and we might talk about this in a bit, is more on Tom Telesco. Staley, I think, is totally fine. Unless the Chargers organization is somehow now an organization that fires guys immediately, there's nothing about their history that suggests that he's a one-and-done sort of guy. And actually, I just met with Arjun on Friday, and we were talking about this, and he doesn't think Staley's a one-and-done guy either, just because of the organization and because of the coach he is. But it will be a bit damning if his record is worse than Anthony Lynn's. Now, granted, was it that really Anthony Lynn's reason that was Anthony Lynn the reason that they went 7-9 and won their last 4 games? Not really. It was all Justin Herbert. But, if Staley's record, at least the win-loss percentage, is lower than what Anthony Lynn had, I think Chargers fans are going to be a little bit antsy. I couldn't think of why outside of devastating injuries. And for that reason, even if that's the reason, if it's devastating injuries, then you have to keep him because it's not his fault. So as long as the offensive line has shown improvement, because they invested a lot in that, and as long as the defense is showing that, they're pressuring more, they're blitzing more, and that there's some improvement there, it's okay. I think as long as they stay about even, I'm fine, because there's so much turnover. There's so many new players. All the coaches are different. The stadium, the fans, everything is going to be so different this year. As long as they're the same, I'm okay. It's just going backwards, I think I'd be worried.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair if you're a little worried, if you're a little antsy. And obviously I know that there's going to be people going to freaking out if the Chargers are, 7-10 again. But, I can't imagine there's a world that Brandon Staley is fired after the end of this year. It's just not the Chargers mantra.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Tom Telesco, that's another case. So this was kind of the other variation of this question. What would have to happen for Telesco to lose his job at the end of this year?
Oh, man.
I mean, I think it would have to be A, really bad record, B, I don't know, maybe Rashawn Slater looks bad. You would have to add, I think, a bunch of things on top of each other for Telesco to lose his job. So, I mean, they just gave him another coaching hire. And this is why I say, to me, the job securities of Staley and Telesco aren't that different. Because to me, if you're firing Staley, you're also firing Telesco, right? You're not going to give Telesco a 4th coaching hire of his tenure. Like, I can't really imagine any situation on the football field where that would be the case. Or, maybe there's some kind of locker room thing that happens, but, we don't really have any information that would suggest that's a problem. But yeah, to me, I think they're pretty much linked at this point. If it works out with Tom Telesco, that will have meant that it works out with Brandon Staley. I don't think there's many, worlds where you can see going forward where Tom Telesco is fired, but Brandon Staley's not, just because, it says they're coaching hire. So I think it would be both of them that would go in that case.
Yeah, I don't know how I could put this into words, but basically I disagree. I totally think there's a world where Telesco is fired and Staley isn't. I think at some point, like, they're going to have to find a scapegoat to have to fire. And I thought that was going to be the case with Gus Bradley last season, mid-season. And I guess they didn't do that. So maybe based on their history, they won't scapegoat a guy, unless you count Ken Wisenhunt as that. But that was an odd situation that we don't know a whole lot about. I think the only reason he'd be fired, of course, injuries is a thing, but it's if everything that came before Staley didn't work out, and all the gambles that he took on players that he thought were going to be good, it just didn't work out. If Nwosu just gets hurt and doesn't pan out badly, does not pan out, then I think that maybe then he'll be fired. But we'll see. If they go 5-11 or 5-12, 4-13, oh my gosh, we're all educated. I don't know why we can't figure this out. I don't know. I think at some point they're going to have to look for some sort of answers, because I don't know. It also depends on how much they think that Staley is running the show now versus Telesco. If they think, and if the organization knows that Staley is actually really doing all these moves, and a lot of what we've seen is because Staley has so much power and they really don't need Telesco, and they can get rid of him anyway and still maintain kind of the same direction of the organization, then maybe there's a guy that works better with Staley. But that's really all I can think of.
Yeah, those are fair points. I think it would take like some kind of disaster season for Telesco to be fired. I think, like Alex has kind of talked about, him and Staley are kind of tied together. And also, like, finding Justin Herbert is something that typically gives GMs, a larger window and some more career longevity. So we'll see. I think it would take a couple seasons of underperforming for Telesco to be fired.
The only kind of reason that I say that they're tied together is, even if you're saying like, okay, Brandon Staley has the power in that organization, like in Tyler's hypothetical, do you then want to bring in a GM who's really not a GM for Brandon Staley, right? Or somebody like that, that GM job becomes less attractive. I don't tend to think that's the case. I think Tom Telesco is the guy making the moves, obviously with input from Brandon Staley. But yeah, to me, and this is just the process of hiring a new GM, most new GMs, when they come to a job, they want to hire a coach too, right? Which is why a lot of organizations clean house. There are exceptions to that rule, all the time in the NFL or the NBA. But to me, if you're firing the GM, then I think it's got to be clean house at that point. But that's just kind of my viewpoint on it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Alex. So our next question is from I'm that dude 619. He wants to know about Emeka Egbule and if we think he can be a surprise player for the Chargers this year. It would have to take an injury. Like I think he's shown very minimal flashes where I'm okay with him as like the fifth pass rusher on the team. But if Bosa and Wosu and Fackrell and Rumph are all healthy, like those are the four guys that are going to be rushing the passer more often. I just think that until someone goes down in front of him, he's going to be a special teams guy. And right, like that's important. The Chargers need players like him to kind of take that next step as a special teams player. And if he's able to really show positive signs there, then, he'll stay on the field and he'll stay on the roster. But as a pass rusher, like it's going to take an injury, probably 2 injuries for him to get on the field and to take meaningful snaps for this team.
Right. I mean, there's a difference between him making the roster, which we've talked about, and him being a true breakout player. Yeah. I think there's a chance he makes the roster, although I think we predicted that he wouldn't in our roster predictions episode. But there is a world where I think they say, okay, hey, we're not super comfortable with our edge depth and we'd like to have a fifth guy. I think that can be Egbule, and in that case, he will get some playing time. But yeah, I don't really see any potential for breakout season, particularly just because in that scenario, even he's like the 4th, 5th pass rusher as opposed to, someone whose position is linebacker, but, he's not really going to be playing linebacker. It would just have to be as a pass rusher.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you guys. He's either going to be the 5th pass rusher or he's going to be surprised because he stepped onto the field because of injuries. Otherwise, like we're either going to not see it coming or we're going to exactly see what's going to happen, which is he doesn't step onto the field much. I'm pretty sure he has like 40 pass rush reps in the last 2 seasons, which is fine. Like they had plenty of edge rushers, but then they signed a free agent with the intention of sort of starting or at least being in the rotation. And then they signed a guy, they drafted a guy who they, in terms of draft position, was ahead of where Egbule was drafted 2 years ago. And it's their guy. So if he's a surprise, great. Like he had a really nice performance against the Saints, 3 pressures on 17 pass rushes, but otherwise
that's not it.
Like, that's kind of it. And that's cool. Like if you're a great special teams contributor, that's no problem. I appreciate that. We all need that. The Chargers need that, but that's kind of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm excited to see what that edge rusher group, looks like, right? Because we've talked about, the depth kind of being a concern. And so we've got to see someone really kind of step up. Maybe Egbule can kind of beat out. It's all good. The little table here is a little wobbly. So maybe Egbule is able to beat out Chris Rumph for this year for some, like 10 pass rush snaps a game. We'll have to see. Next question is from Vic Bolt. What are you guys more excited to watch this season? The offense, the defense, or the special teams? Tell me why, and tell me the player that you will be watching the most in that position. And then he says, shout out to my diehard Bolt Club fan. So Tyler, you want to start with this one first?
It's not special teams, so I'm more excited to watch the offensive line, which I know Steven's going to agree with me on because the Chargers have not had a good offensive line pretty much since I've been a fan of the Chargers. And so I'd like to see them have a decent one. I don't know, like that means like, oh, they had an offensive line, they're really good when they had LT and McNeil and all those guys. Like, I wasn't a huge fan back then, so sorry, I wasn't like the biggest fan. So I haven't seen like a really good one.
Yeah.
I like the Chargers. As soon as my fandom started, their offensive line sucked. You can blame me. So yeah, offensive line would be great, and of course, Derwin James on defense.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I agree kind of with Derwin James. That's actually what I was going to say, kind of in that secondary, and just seeing how the secondary, kind of works together as a whole, I think is kind of the most exciting, given how, Brandon Staley has found ways to use his secondary players. I think that's probably going to be the most fun thing to watch on the defense. Like on offense, I think offensive line would be fun, and obviously me and Tyler will be paying intense attention to the kicking battle. But I think that will mostly, take place over the course of the preseason. So I would say offensive line, probably the offense, and I would say secondary, specifically Derwin James for the defense.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how this offense comes together and how they're able to kind of build around Justin Herbert and, like Tyler mentioned, the offensive line. But I think for this team to really, reach that true ceiling, Derwin and Joey Bosa have to play, an extended amount of time together. Like, I think the offense has enough talent to kind of, overcome an injury between those two and, be an above average team. But for this team to reach its ultimate goal, like Derwin and Joey Bosa have to stay on the field. So I think that kind of has to be the answer by default. But we'll see. Concerning the offensive line, Drew Doms wants to know, what's the ceiling of this offensive line? Best case scenario, could they be a top 5 offensive line realistically? So Seth Walder of ESPN came out with an article projecting, the pass block win rates for all these teams. And, he projected the Chargers to finish 22nd, which would obviously be a massive upgrade over last season when they were 31st. But one of the things that he mentioned is that, the model's not going to, predict, elite production from a rookie right away. And of course, Brian Bulaga, has struggled to stay on the field. And so I think obviously the Chargers will be better this year if the starters are able to kind of stay relatively healthy. I personally think the ceiling is maybe like top 10, because I think they'll have, if Rashawn Slater plays at his ceiling, they'll have 2 above average to potentially like high level Pro Bowl players in Slater and Lindsley. I think Bulaga's kind of past the point of being a Pro Bowl level player, but he can definitely be above average. So best case scenario is maybe like top 10. And then next year, if they want to, they can, definitely get like another high level guard, potentially move on from Bulaga, get another high level tackle. Because this unit's going to take some work to really reach its peak. But, this year, if everything goes right, I think they can absolutely be a top 10 unit.
I'll say that I think they're more top 15 as the ceiling. I think they can definitely kind of be in there. Top 5 is a bit of an unrealistic expectation after 1 year.
Right.
I think that's something that, 2-3 years down the road, right? If Slater's playing at a high level and you have Lindsley plus, replacement for Bulaga, high level guard, right? You can kind of, imagine them in that kind of tier, down the road. I think top 15 would be the ceiling. And look, if they have the 15th best offensive line in the league, that would be, amazing, right? Just in terms of improvement year over year. They haven't had a top 15 offensive line in probably the last decade. I'd have to go back through the numbers and check, but I'm pretty sure that checks out. So, to me, that would be kind of the expectation for them this year. Well, I should say maybe as an expectation, I think they should be, if they were top 20, I think that would be fine. Or as you said, that ESPN projection had them at around 22. If they're somewhere between 22 and 15, I think that's great. If they're actually, towards the 15 or maybe, really cracking that top 15, that would be, the ceiling.
Yeah, any return towards the average, towards the mean of the offensive line is completely fine with me. It's what we say about the special teams. And if they go from 32nd to 1st, great. But if they go from 32nd to 20th, that's great too. Best case scenario, I agree. Top 10 is best case scenario. Top 15 is completely fine with me. I mean, the organization's going the right direction and the moves generally panned out.
Yeah, so I wrote an article for LAFB about this because, I was just kind of curious to see if there had been any units that had really, undergone the kind of, nuclear option that the Chargers have undergone this season. And one kind of parallel is, the Houston Texans in 2018.
Great.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the offensive line, it was fine, right? Like in 2018, the Texans had, the 31st ranked offensive line. They had 5 players who were pretty much, below league average, similar to the Chargers. And then that offseason, they drafted Titus Howard in the first round. They drafted a guard, Max Sharping, in the second round, and then they traded for Laramie Tunsil. So there's definitely some parallels there. And in terms of like Pro Football Focus, they went from, the 31st to I think like the 12th, if I'm not mistaken. I have to go back and check. So like there is some kind of precedence for a team undergoing this kind of nuclear option and improving. But top 5, definitely not. That's definitely not realistic.
Good pull, Steven.
Thank you.
You're welcome. High five.
Yes. First in-person high five between me and Tyler right there on camera. All right, let's get to our next question here from Liam. He wants to know, my buddy and I have this debate all the time. Who is better, or who would you rather have, Keenan and Mike Williams or Juju Smith-Schuster and Chase Claypool? Who wants to start this one first?
I can start with this one. I think Chase Claypool, if you're comparing him to Mike Williams, he has the much higher ceiling, in my opinion, just over the next 3-4 years of his career. But the distance between Keenan Allen and Juju Smith-Schuster, I mean, I think that was proven by what Juju Smith-Schuster's market was this year. So unfortunately for him, he got a 1-year deal. Like that's, and part of that was the market, but I don't think Juju is seen as a consensus top 15 receiver. I think he's kind of one of those guys that's good, but I don't know if you love him as your wide receiver one. I just think Keenan has much more of that actual kind of skill set that you need, particularly route running we talked about. But yeah, I would rather have Keenan Allen a lot more than Juju Smith-Schuster. And between Mike Williams and Chase Claypool, if you're really making me choose the next 4 or 5 years, I'd probably rather have Chase Claypool. But yeah, the difference between Keenan and Juju is just too much. So I would pick those two.
Yeah, Liam, you and your buddy, that's a good debate. Like, okay, as Chargers fans, I kind of think I'd lean Keenan Allen anyway. And of course, you'd rather have the better receiver of the group. But, on the other hand, your buddy is kind of right to assume, I would guess, that these guys are both cheaper and they are younger, or at least I would assume going to be more stable long-term than someone like Keenan Allen, who's obviously more expensive and slightly older, and then Mike Williams, who can't stay healthy. So I think those other two options are maybe better long-term, but still, I'd rather take the group with the better wide receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of sidebar here. Did you guys hear the Ben Roethlisberger story that came out recently?
What story?
He apparently he's become addicted to working out and dieting, and apparently is in the best shape of his life. So
wow,
that's the kind of off-season content that they want to put out there. Yeah, Ben Roethlisberger's really going to lose the weight this year.
He's still going to be fat. Like, come on,
yeah, but Ben Roethlisberger's going to suddenly turn into Lamar Jackson in his last year. Like, okay, miss me with that.
I know. It's like, I'm glad that it took him until year 18 to figure out how to diet and work out. All right. Next question from Nick Mondor. Excuse me if I pronounced that wrong. He wants to know our top 5 favorite players of all time and why. He says any team. So you can kind of mix it up there. You want to start with this one, or you want me to start with this one?
You can start.
Okay. So I think first and foremost, I think my top 2 would have to be LT and Phillip Rivers. Those two were, so important to me, falling in love with the sport and being able to really, become a fan of the Chargers specifically. After that, I have always really liked Larry Fitzgerald.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a huge fan of his, and being able to kind of watch the way that he conducts himself and just really goes out and has, 1,000-yard seasons like nobody's business. So I think he's another one I would be inclined to say. 4th and 5th, I don't know. That's tough, man. My mind instantly goes to Chargers players, of course. But, if I'm talking outside the Chargers, I think Troy Polamalu is someone that I've always loved to watch, and his highlights are crazy. And then for number 5, I'll say, I have to say an offensive lineman, right? Like that's me. So I don't know, man. Maybe like Tyron Smith, I guess. I don't know. That's a tough one. I'd have to really think about it. I didn't read this question until just now. But I think for sure my top 3 would be LT, Phillip Rivers, and Larry Fitzgerald.
Thank you for covering this, because I literally had to pay for my metered parking that was expiring. So appreciate you, Steven, for taking that so I could take care of that. LT and Rivers, definitely. One of the reasons I fell in love with the sport, at least watching it, was Peyton Manning. Okay. I also, obviously because he's amazing, but also because every time he would play Eli Manning, they would kick the shit out of the Giants. And I thought that was so damn funny. And he was just so good. And just like, watch this little bro, and just roasted the Giants every time. And I love that. So Manning for sure. I would have thought Fitzgerald, one of my, the first Super Bowls I watched was the Steelers Cardinals Super Bowl. And that really made me oh my God, this is really exciting. What a good game. And of course, Larry Fitzgerald was a pretty big part of that. So probably him. I don't know why I can't think of a fifth guy. There's just not like another fifth guy. Like I kind of,
tough.
I don't know, Alex. I'll defer to you.
All right. Well, okay. Time to
How
be
many
the
Eagles
heel.
make the list?
My number one is Brian Dawkins. I think
That's a
he's
good
just
choice.
one of the most fun Eagles players of all time. Easily my favorite Eagle. And, just the energy he brought out every weekend. Like, I thought it was funny. Just, he's the only person ever to have left the Eagles as a star and been not booed coming back home, when he was with the Broncos. But he just always brought that energy. I think he's my number one and one of the reasons I love football so much. I think Rivers has to make the list. He's my number two. Just kind of growing up with him also, and just a real part of my formative years in football. He was always high class, all that, and I wish he got that Super Bowl. He didn't, but it kind of is what it is. But he was always super fun to watch, and you wouldn't want anyone else as kind of your quarterback leader. When we talk about Chargers fans, right? Number three, I'll go T.O. I always thought T.O. was super fun to watch. Larry Fitzgerald, personality-wise, is like the complete opposite of T.O.
Yes.
He's like the consummate professional guy. T.O. is the loud, sometimes obnoxious, but his play style was super fun at the wide receiver position. I think, you talk about kind of the top three receivers of all time. I think it's some combination of kind of Rice, T.O., and Moss in that top three. And I thought T.O. was the most fun out of those guys to watch. Number three.
Four.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Number four, right. Number four, I'll go LT, and to wrap the list up, I'll go with Peyton. I think that's a solid one. I think he was always kind of one of the most fun opposing quarterbacks to watch, and he had a play style and kind of grit to him that made me just respect him, really. It's not like Tom Brady where I just hated watching him every single week. So I guess so my list would be Dawkins, Rivers, T.O., going with Peyton at 5, and then who did I have at 4?
LT.
LT at 4. So those would be my top 5.
Right on, Alex. Okay, I'm gonna go with a really dangerous final fifth person here. It's not going to be a person.
Tom Brady.
Hell no. That's dead last. That is the whatever circle of hell that is. If I ever say Tom Brady, just snap my neck. No, it actually would be the opposite. And the reason I don't like him, as my fifth person, I'm going to pick the Raiders. And I know it's going to be just genuinely awful. Okay, it's of all time. I'm not saying that I'm like a Raiders fan, but I grew up one. And I grew up with so much Ken Stabler and Dave Casper and all these guys, and goes to the post and all these things, and the sea of hands game against Miami, right? I can rattle these things off because I grew up as a Raiders fan, and so I know some of these so much, and that's part of what started my fandom, was watching these, unfortunately, 70s and 80s Raiders highlights, because there wasn't much in the last 20 years. But watching those with my dad was really cool. So I will say, I guess, like, I feel if I'm going to pick another player, I guess I got to pick like some Raiders players. I'll just say the Raiders. I'm so sorry, internet. I'm so sorry about the ratio over the last 2 days.
Disgusting.
That's going to be fun. But, I mean, anyone who listens to this show probably knows by now that, Tyler spends thousands and thousands of dollars watching the Chargers. So I think, I think you're fine.
And my dad spends thousands and thousands of dollars watching the Chargers, and he's a Raiders fan. So
there we go.
Come and some slack.
All right, next question here from Mike Yeager, who recently went to SoFi Stadium in his Rashawn Slater jersey that we gave him. So shout out to Mike.
Oh.
He wants to know, what would you guys do with the remaining cap space, which we've kind of talked about. The Chargers have, after these rookies and kind of in-season budget, I think they have about like $7 or $8 million potentially that they could use to sign somebody if they wanted to. So I've kind of talked about this. I would really like to see them bring in another safety, potentially another pass rusher. If I had my personal choice, I would probably take that money towards a pass rusher. Olivier Vernon is still out there. Everson Griffin is still out there. Give them, a couple $1 million here, maybe $3-4 million, and have a true like supplementary pass rusher. Of course, that would push Emeka Egbule and Chris Rumph down the depth chart. But I think this team really needs another veteran presence to come off the edge and create some havoc. And Olivier Vernon was actually really, really good last year for the Browns. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I mean, he was better than Jadeveon Clowney was last year, and Clowney is replacing him. So if I could pick one player right now to sign, I think that's who I would choose, is Olivier Vernon.
All right, I'll go. I trade for Aaron Donald because fuck it. He says, whatever. What would you want to do with the cap space? That's what I would do. That's what I'd do with it. They could use another interior guy here. He's pretty good. He's only the 8th best interior defensive lineman, apparently, or 6th best, or whatever it was. So, you'd probably come for really cheap. So, yeah, I'd trade for Aaron Donald.
Okay. I think like Steven said, really at this point they have about, I actually think it's like 12 or 13 million technically they have left to spend, or around 10. But yeah, really at that point you're talking about depth signings that you can get for really cheap, and then you're using the rest of the 5 million, or so for in-season signings. We always talk about the safety room and how we don't have enough depth there. I'd sign a guy like a Malik Hooker, or somebody that can just, get you some, maybe quality snaps, or at least if he has to play, I trust a little bit more than a Mark Webb and kind of an Alohi Gilman. So I kind of would rather have him. But I think Olivier Vernon is a very good answer too, just because, they could always use that edge help. But the most important thing with this question is really when you talk about the 20 million in official cap space they have, roll it over to next year. Like when we talk about kind of free agency and then potentially having 50 million, I know a lot of people might be mad that they didn't use the cap space next year, but they do have the ability, given Justin Herbert's rookie contract and about the, 45 or 50 million that they'll have projected for next year, to kind of do whatever they want. So to me, that's the sort of the primary answer, I guess.
Yeah, that seems the likely outcome at this point. All right, what the Duck 56? That's hilarious. I love that. He wants to know realistic percentage of snaps each rookie plays this season. Obviously, best case scenario for Rashawn Slater is 100%. After that, it gets a little more interesting, because Asante Samuel Jr., while he should be the starter, could potentially, be taken off the field in favor of other players at certain times. And then Palmer and McKitty, I think, after that. So, Alex, what do you think? It's tough to say like exactly, but what kind of range of outcomes are you thinking for some of these rookie players for the Chargers?
Yeah, Slater should be 100%. That's what you would hope for. Aside from him, is Samuel Jr. If he was really starting from week 1 at the outside, he has to play high 80s, to 100% throughout the whole season. Now, if he were to get benched or something, that would change. But, if he's starting from week 1, I expect that to be 85 to 100% out. And then going down the list, you have Palmer. I believe Tyron Johnson, I just looked this up before the show when I saw this question, but Tyron Johnson had about 22% snaps last year. So you assume that'll go up for Tyron, and Jalen Guyton was something around like 15 to 20%. So that'll go up for him. So Palmer's kind of tough. I think you could say maybe around 15% of the snaps for him, potentially more if he breaks out. But the wide receiver room, unless there's an injury, does have, a lot of guys that need to get the ball. So I would say probably 15 for him. McKitty is going to need to play a little bit more. I'd say 20 to 25, somewhere around there, just because they'll need him as a blocker. And then, at that point, past that 4th round, or no, that was the 2nd pick and the 3rd. Rumpf will have to play some snaps, so that'll probably be, I guess 15%. You can probably, chuck him in there as one of those guys. And going down the list more, Brendan Jaimez would be, 5th round. I could see him getting snaps in some games, I guess, if a guy gets injured, or, in the unlikely event he does steal the opening job from Abuji, as we talked about. I think that's pretty unlikely, though. So I'll say, like, somewhere between 0 and 10, just as, like, he has to come in for a couple snaps here and there. And then you're talking about Neiman at that point. You're talking about Mark Webb. You're talking about Larry Roundtree. All those guys... All those guys will get some snaps. Particularly Nick Neiman will get a bunch of special team snaps. I think we expect Larry Roundtree also getting special team snaps. And in terms of an offensive percentage, probably, I don't know, somewhere between 0 and 10 again, like we've kind of been saying. And then Mark Webb, I actually wouldn't be shocked if Mark Webb had to play a little bit more than those two guys, just because the safety room is a little more thin. So, maybe you could say 15% for him. But yeah, after really the fourth round is when it kind of starts to tail off in terms of the percentages these guys are going to be playing.
In the interest of not doing that entire list again, I'll just say that I agree that Mark Webb is probably the guy who sees potentially the most snaps of the ones that are after the first two picks. Like at least Palmer made 20 something, but like McKinney 30 something. But Webb, I think the only reason he hits the field is because of injuries, and that's probably going to happen. And so I think he'll play the most snaps just because of that. Could be Roundtree. Does anyone remember how many snaps Kelly played last season?
The first little bit, it was a lot, obviously, but I think overall in the season, I probably guess like 20%.
I'll look it up. I mean, I don't think he played the last like 5 games, right?
4.
I think he had 4 healthy scratches total, but I think he played a little bit in the Chiefs game, the second one. So yeah, I just looked it up. Joshua Kelly played 25% of the offensive snaps and 23% of the special team snaps. Obviously, we know how that went. But yeah, so about 25% of the offensive snaps. Justin Jackson, 16%. Austin Eckler, obviously 35, was injured for a couple games. So yeah, those were the top 3 from last year in the running back room.
Really the only thing that I'm going to say differently, I think Brendan Hymas probably ends up closer to like 20-25. Just like he's going to have to make a start or two.
Yeah.
And, that's 160 snaps right there if he makes 2 starts. So that's really the only thing I think is going to be different. All right, last question here. And again, thank you guys so much for asking these. Thanks for being able to watch our impromptu in-person episode. Hopefully the connection was okay. Last question from Bolt_Bo. Which team in the NFL has the ugliest jerseys? So that's a really interesting question. I think as a whole, I think every team kind of has at least one good look, in my opinion. My least favorite aspect of any uniform in the NFL are the Patriots shoulder stripes that just have there's no reason to have them.
Yeah.
And they just end right here on the shoulder. They don't continue all the way around the armpit. So that is my least favorite feature of an NFL uniform. So I guess that's my answer. The Patriots and their ugly, wonky shoulder stripes.
Yeah, I mean the Jaguars are pretty ugly. They have revamped it, but they used to have that ugly golden black helmet that they did for a while during
that was
the
half and half, right?
Yeah, during the Bortles era, that was weird. They did correct that, and
the Bortles era.
Yeah, teal and black. Teal and black looks okay, I think, in some instances. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of teams actually that could kind of use a refresher. I've actually not loved the Cardinals jerseys. I think that they just kind of look plain. The Jaguars are sort of in that. Carolina, I always thought kind of looked ugly. Other than that, I think they all look pretty okay. But I would say those are kind of my bottom 3. But yeah, so yeah, I would say Arizona, Jacksonville, and Carolina just all kind of look lame to me.
I don't know how you can't pick the Browns. It's literally they're called the Browns, and they just look like a jack-o'-lantern and a turd had a baby, and it's what are you doing here? And there's nothing. It's just this orange on their helmet, and that's it. They're just some kid was I don't know, orange, and you made your Wii character, and it's I don't know. This works, right? This is different colors, and so that's ugly. The Rams white bone whatever with a speed dating name tag. That was horrendous. I think they've updated that. I don't know. They're changing
they're still doing the bone, but they are now introducing a actual white jersey, which is apparently a modern throwback. And
okay.
So I don't know. It's weird.
All right. Well, there it is. I don't know. How do you feel about the Eagles jerseys, Alex?
Yeah, they've always looked pretty good. I like them the most. I want them to bring Kelly Green back, which
Kelly Green needs to come back.
Probably will help them with the helmet rule being changed. Apparently, they're still rolling with the black alternates, but I've always liked them. I know there's a whole debate about whether midnight green should be the color in the Eagles, kind of fan base, but I always thought it looks pretty good. Yeah, I would say actually the Rams are pretty bad. You know what?
They are pretty bad.
I don't know if I would put them bottom one as like the worst, but you know, the only thing that I've said is like I don't understand why they just refuse to use the throwbacks now. Like they were in Los Angeles using them for the Super Bowl when they got there, and then they just decided to completely throw that jersey out, and now they brought back this weird kind of throwback, new updated look that they're using with the white one, like Steven mentioned. So I don't know. It's a weird kind of thing. I don't think they should have ever changed their jerseys, or if they did update them, at least keep the throwback in the rotation.
I mean, I like their royal blues. My biggest complaint about them, like Tyler said, is the weird like name tag thing, and then the glossy numbers is very like European soccer-esque, which I don't love. But I think the royal blues and the all whites that they have now kind of not overcompensate, but I think it kind of takes them out of the running of ugliest uniforms. You know, a couple months ago, I probably would have said the Bengals would be in this conversation too.
Oh yeah.
Their orange and black ones were just awful, but I really like the tweaks that they made. You know, if you follow me on Twitter, I've kind of become a uniform snob thanks to the Chargers, but you know, I really like the way that the Browns and the Bengals have updated, because their uniforms now, they're really cohesive, they're really simple, bold outlines. And so while the color scheme is not like my favorite, you know, I at least I know what's going on, and it's not, you know, a ton of question marks and European soccer numbers.
Yeah, I thought the Browns jerseys looked better than the kind of the ones they had for like the last decade, because they really made them look back to the way they did on like the 2007 kind of Browns teams, you know, that sort of era, and yeah, then they had the color rush, which I think is a much better look than some of their other jerseys. It just looks like poop on top, poop on bottom, but at least it's consistent. So yeah, I would say the Browns are not bottom tier, but I would say they're middle. I think they've gotten better, but there's only so much you can do with brown and orange.
Yeah. All right, so we'll wrap this up with this. Who are your favorite uniforms? You can obviously say the Chargers, but outside of the Chargers, who are your favorite uniforms in the NFL?
That's good. Well, the Chargers. I mean, are we gonna? That's, I guess, by default.
Yeah.
Kind of number one.
I really like the Ravens uniform kits that they have. And then I would say the Saints probably are after that. So top three teams, I would say Chargers, Ravens, Saints.
Yeah, I would have definitely said the Saints in there. Obviously, the Chargers. Ravens is a good call. I can't think of another jersey after that. Like some of the stuff that Steelers does is really stupid, so not them. Again, like tying back into this, God help me. I loved the Raiders throwbacks. Like when they used to be all like, and like the sleeves are all big and baggy, and there's something about like the Raiders old school look that I really liked. I am so sorry, everyone. I let you all down.
Yeah, I would say Chargers number one.
Yeah.
2 and 3. I really like the Packers jerseys. I think the green and yellow kind of works. Yeah. They're a bit classic, and I'll say the Bills. I'll say the Bills at number 3. I like what they have done kind of with the blue and red jerseys, and they sort of have the color rush, which is interesting, and the throwback. So yeah, I mean that's pretty classic in and of itself.
Oh, I also just thought of a uniform that I hate, and that's the Seahawks neon green one.
Yeah, I mean that one's bad, and it's bad because the Seahawks other jerseys are pretty good, and then that one is just like, you know, flaming hot tire on fire.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fun, you know, doing our
you forgot to ask Tyler's question.
Oh yeah, Alex, why are you obsessing over Space Jam?
So I've been going through so I watched Space Jam 2. It was okay, but the whole thing was basically a Warner Brothers ad. I don't know why that was the choice was made there. It was good though. LeBron was fine. But the original Space Jam is like one of the craziest ideas for a movie that anyone's ever made, which is just like Michael Jordan Looney Tunes. It just feels like one of those, you know, 90s ideas that like wouldn't get made today. That was probably some cocaine. Well, okay, the sequel is made because of 90s nostalgia and cashing in on the original, but like that kind of movie would not get made today because everything is like, you know, Marvel movies, and that's about it. So those are the big blockbusters that come out now, and occasional Star Wars. But yeah, so No, I mean, it's one of the movies from my childhood that I really like. I did think the original was better than 2. So people come at me about that. I don't think it factors into the GOAT debate between LeBron and LeBron and Jordan.
Did you see at the game yesterday that they put up like the Rotten Tomatoes score of the movie while they're showing LeBron?
Well,
Like,
that's because Disney owns Black Widow, so they don't want Black Widow to lose to Space Jam this weekend. So yeah, Disney owns ESPN, so the whole mafia thing is kind of happening there. But I don't know. Steven Sims for LeBron being the GOAT on Twitter all the time. I don't really have my mind firmly made up in the GOAT debate, but I thought they were both good. The Michael Jordan one will always have a special place in my heart. But so that's why I've been obsessed. And I was disappointed that in the new one, they did not play the original Space Jam theme with the Quad City DJs. That is why it went down from an 8 to a 7 for me. So, LeBron, you should have made that decision executively.
I mean, because the Space Jam 2 has been in the works forever, right? And so I was always worried about like how they would do it and make it really like their own idea.
Mm-hmm.
So are you going to watch it?
No.
Okay. So
I haven't seen the first one either.
Yeah. So they kind of take it in like the video game direction. So I kind of like the way that they set it up. I thought it was pretty unique and creative. The soundtracks, like I thought the soundtrack for the Space Jam 2 was fine. I loved the little like wrap off with the pig. And I thought that part was hilarious.
Wait, does he get through it?
Yeah.
Does he really?
Even better though, someone interlaced the rap battle from 8 Mile and placed it with a video of the pig rapping, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, the soundtrack from the original was just so good. So like, I guess if you're asking me to compare, like that would kind of give the edge to the original. But it was fine. I mean, like people are so cynical about movies like this nowadays. Yeah. It's cheesy, it's corny. It's like, well, yeah, it's made for kids.
It's a movie about how either LeBron James or Michael Jordan has to go to Toon World to play a basketball game against aliens.
Right.
It's supposed to be that way. But yeah, no, Space Jam 2 was fine. But yeah, I always kind of like the original one a little bit better. I did like what they did in this one with the Michael Jordan cameo. I thought that was funny.
That I saw.
So that was a good one. Because I actually thought he was going to come out, and but I'm not going to get into spoilers. But that was pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, overall, this one was like a little more funny, a little more lighthearted, but. You're paying to go see a cheesy, corny child's movie. Like, it is what it is. Like, people are trashing them on Rotten Tomatoes. And I'm like, if you're going in there expecting some kind of, like, award-winning movie, like, you're going to be disappointed. Like, just go sit there and have fun. Like, that's what it's about. Right. All right. Well, this has been an awesome experience. A little bit of a rocky start getting things set up. But, we had a good time in person. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for the questions. As always, make sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the videos, comment to us, let us know what kind of terrible takes or good takes that we have, and make sure and leave us a rating review.
Gee, I wonder which one's the terrible take. I wonder who you're referencing there,
well, you kind of dug yourself in a hole there.
Okay.
Yeah, man. But thank you guys for tuning in. We are officially 10 days away from training camp. Tyler and I are going to meet up next weekend for that as well. So come see us. Most likely on Saturday, the 31st, when that's kind of seems like the big day of training camp. Obviously, it opens up on Wednesday, but we will be there that weekend. So come say hi, and we will see you guys next time.
That's all, folks.
Peace.
Nice.